Dick's a retired scientist with profound knowledge of the impacts of carbon dioxide and methane on the atmosphere. But since he retired, he's devoted himself to being a climate change activist. Now, I was going to introduce you to Ray Bomber, who you probably all know, but poor old Ray fell off his bicycle, which is just too awful, and broke his wrist. This is Chris Stewart, who's actually Dick's son-in-law, and also he has an electric car. So that's fantastic. Thanks for studying in, Chris.
All right, you're very welcome.
And so, the Warren family and the Stewart family are going to tell you the pros and cons of having an electric car, because they both have one.
The idea was to have a little bit of a dialogue between the two of us. We both have electric cars. We both had them for 6 years, coming up, about 5, 6 years. Yeah, so we both know the pros and the cons pretty well. The first point that Ray suggested we discuss between the two of us was what vehicle did you get and when and the price? Because those are pretty key figures. We're going to come back to that later. I'm going to start off, and Chris can maybe come in quickly then. I've been wanting an electric car for yonks. Quite simply because as a scientist, they are so wasteful compared, sorry, the other way around. They are not wasteful compared to the fire and smoke machines, as I call them. Fire and smoke machines. What happens? They make good flames and not much else. Over to Chris, who has a different experience with a different kind of car.
Yes, thanks very much, Dick. Yeah, I'm Dick, not Ray, and I have a Tesla. So yeah, I went at the sort of top end of the electric car spectrum. Bought my car September 2015, so 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago. How much did it cost? My wife is sitting in the audience. I never actually confessed to her exactly how much it cost. So I'd rather not at this point in time, but it was quite expensive. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Teslas in particular is they are expensive to buy, but then surprisingly cheap to run once you've got them. So I used to drive BMWs. I am a petrol head. For those of you thinking, oh, I'm into petrol cars, I was and probably still am a petrol head. Had BMWs forever. My BMW used to cost £120 to fill up. My Tesla costs £60 to fill up. So there's quite a big difference in running costs once you have it. But I do understand that the hurdle for a lot of people is the price, the initial price, and that is continuing to come down. So the main thing that drives price is batteries, and battery prices have dropped by a factor of probably about 4 since I bought my car, and will continue to come down. And fairly soon I think we'll be at the point where you will not have to pay a premium to buy an electric car. At which point, to me, as a petrol head, I think it's a no-brainer. I think there's really no reason why you wouldn't have an electric car. Essentially, because although, yes, they're going to save the planet, I think for most people that's not why they're going to buy them. They're going to buy them because they save them money and they're better to drive, and both of those things are true. And you save the planet as well. What's not to like?
The next question, because we're answering Ray's questions, you see here, it says, how did you arrive at your decision? Well, I've outlined some of that already. I've wanted one for a long time, and they're so lovely to drive. You know, you glide. You don't have any crunching of gears and things. And once you've got it, they're very cheap to run. In Chris's case, they are free to run. Now, that's a big one, because that came with his car. Welcome, Ray. Well done. All lined up and ready to go.
No, just carry on as you are.
Oh, we carry on. I think the reason I've outlined already, when we got to it, there's this lovely feeling of one. I'll give you a little bit of sums to work out. A gallon of petrol contains about 40 kilowatt hours of energy. And in a car, you get 40 miles, 50 miles maybe, for the gallon. The same amount of energy in our Renault Zoe takes us 200 miles. The same amount of energy. Now that is so incontrovertible. You can't really argue with that kind of logic. Once you've got it, go. It's lovely. We do most of our charging up at home. We've got a little wall box with a special plug, 7 kilowatts, not all that much, but overnight on half price electricity, you know, on the night rate. We get a full tank in the morning. So that's lovely. So not only have we made this decision, we are now stuck with it, and happily stuck.
And in my case, I was looking to treat myself. I ran a business that was doing pretty well, and had made a little bit of cash, and thought, about time I treated myself, having paid for the house and all the rest of it, kids' educations, etc. Treat myself to a nice fancy car. So my decision was basically driving a Tesla, and then I was like, wow, this is just the best car I've ever driven, and I've driven some quite nice cars in my time. So then it was a question of how can I make the maths add up to justifying the purchase of the car. But essentially, the good news is, I think for those of you thinking about, will I like an electric car, almost certainly you will, just because it's a better driving experience than a petrol car. The things that I think most people are anxious about, certainly things I was anxious about, first and most obvious is range anxiety. What if I run out of electricity? And that is really a function of how big the battery is in the car. So when I started out, a lot of cars had 40 miles of range or 50 miles of range or 60 miles. Teslas had 200 plus. My car had 250 miles of range from standing start. The cars you buy today have 400 plus miles if you buy a Tesla, which is enough. I personally think the magic number is 200. If you have a car that will get close to 200 miles of range, then to all intents and purposes, you will never need to worry about ever running out of juice. If you're planning to do longer trips, so if you want to go to Scotland or if you want to go to France, my wife and I have taken our kids to the Alps and back several times, on go 550 miles. It's not a problem if you can fast charge. So the key there is if you want to do long distances, you have to be able to fast charge. Not all cars come with fast charging. Essentially, the difference for the uninitiated is your common or garden domestic socket. You can charge your car from a domestic socket. 13 amps, 3 kilowatts. It's pretty slow, but it works. But it's alternating current. Fast chargers are direct current, and you need different power electronics on the car to cope with that. Most cars have the option. You have to tick that particular box. Once you have fast charging, essentially the problem goes away, because you rock up to the fast charger. In the case of Teslas, which is what I know about, if you plug into a Tesla fast charger, you typically charge at a rate of 400 miles of range per hour of charging. So in the time it takes you to go to the loo, have a cup of tea, you've got 100 miles on the car, and off you go. And that's essentially the way when I first started, I was like, we've got to stop and wait 3 hours, and actually you don't. Basically, drive for a couple of hours, stop, have a cup of tea, drive for another couple of hours, stop, have a cup of tea, and keep on going till you feel like you can't drive anymore. And as I say, in my case, I've driven to the Alps and back, it's really not a problem. That's problem number one. And then the second thing is, where will I charge? And that essentially is, have you ever been anywhere on planet Earth where you haven't found a power socket, to charge your phone or whatever? You can charge from a domestic plug. So when we went to the Alps, we ended up in a little tiny village in the middle of nowhere, and all I did was go to the local, supermarket, buy an extension cable, plug it into my extension cable so we could trundle it about 120 feet to the car, and then plug in. And it's pretty slow. So first time I plugged it in, boom, the lights went. I'm like, oh, too much power. So just dial it back from 13 amps down to 10 amps. Everything was happy. And you're going to say, oh, but doesn't it take a long time? Yes, it does. But most cars, crazy stat, spend 22 hours a day rusting, doing nothing. So most of the time your car is just sat there not being used. So basically I plug my car in, charging very, very slowly. Oh, I need to go to the shops. Unplug it, drive it to the shops, drive it back, plug it in again. And basically after a day, it's fully charged and off you go. And then you don't need to worry anymore because you can just keep topping up. So basically that also isn't, in my experience, a problem. But it's something, until you have the car, you don't know whether that's going to be a problem or not. So yeah, for myself, I can't ever see myself buying an internal combustion engine car again, basically, because they're just not as good. That's fundamentally it. Not as good, forget good for the planet, they're obviously not good for the planet, but they're actually just not as good from any sort of practical point of view.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I live in a flat.
Yes.
Up 2 flights of stairs. So.
Tricky to run your cable down the stairs. Yeah.
I think it would be fraught with danger.
So then there are thousands, literally thousands of public charging stations. So there's an app called ZapMap, there's a website called ZapMap. You can look up where is your nearest charging station and then you just go. Some of them actually are free. So I drove down to Exeter and went to a public car park, noticed there was a charger in it, plugged in, expecting to pay because it was a fast charger. It was free. So actually there are a ton of these things around and a lot of them are free. My wife has a Zoe, she charges once a week. You know, so basically think about that, think about once a week I might have to find somewhere and plug my car in, do some shopping, whatever it is you're going to do. Again, it's not insuperable.
Can I just say there's a guy on stand 5 in Virtually Green who drives an electric car. He lives in
Speak up, Dave.
he charges his car not at home. He charges it in Tesco's and other places around.
Yeah.
I think they've got a map as well on theirs. On one of the stores.
Most cars will come, most electric cars that have a screen will come with a screen that shows you where the nearest charger is.
Yeah.
So depending on the car you have, I mean my car, it'll even tell you, slow down if you want. I have free charging with Tesla. If I use a Tesla supercharger, it's free. So it will route you saying, here's a free charge, here's a free charge. And indeed it tells you to slow down a little because if you want to conserve charge, etc., etc.
There are 7 in Hartford and there are 35 within 5 miles of one.
Okay.
Right.
And needless to say, there are many more charging points than there are petrol stations. Many more. Yeah.
Do you ever have?
Yep.
Do you ever have the challenge of turning up at a charging station and there's a queue of people, or doing apps?
Yeah, only once in my experience. I mean, I tend to go to Teslas because they're fast and they're free, so those are 2 good reasons I use them. And when Tesla puts in their charging network, a lot of places they just put in 2 stalls, and that's obviously not enough. And now I think their minimum is 24 at a time. Helpfully, the Tesla software will tell you there are 24 chargers, 18 are in use, 6 are free, so it will tell you that in the car as you're driving there. Not everybody will do that, but in practice, it's only if you need to fast charge that the issue, if you're just going somewhere where you can just plug in and scrounge some free or cheap electrons, it's not a problem. Just charge when you can.
Yeah, and ZapMap will tell you, if you sort of locate one, it'll say, oh, well, actually, it was last used 20 minutes ago, it's now free. Okay, so it brings you real-time news about each charging point.
You can go to a petrol station and queue to get onto a petrol pump.
Especially at the moment.
At the moment you can. Yeah, 1 or 2 people queuing in Hartford, I noticed. Yeah, so.
Especially now, yeah. But ZapMap will tell you. As you just
Oh yeah, it's a very useful. It's just zap-map.com, and it will reassure you, I think, if you're worried about where to charge. There are no problems. I wanted Chris to mention his little button that starts off INSANE.
Insane. Yes, insane mode. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a petrol head, so essentially,
You get all that.
I made the decision to buy, having driven the car, and the guy's like, go on, boot him, and so I did. I have a mode in my car called insane mode, which basically, removes all restrictions.
And
the car.
what's it called? The plaid? The
Plaid.
plaid
The new
version of
faster,
the car
yeah.
he now runs or uses. If you want times, I'm sorry, some petrol heads love 0 to 60, don't they? Try 2.8 seconds.
Wow.
2.8. And suddenly you're going at 60 miles, head on the headrest, please. It's that petrol heady, but clean. Anyway, that's a side issue.
I think
Yes.
it's time to ask Ray's next question, since we've heard how wonderful
Yep.
this all is. Have you had any bad experiences with your electric cars?
Well, I had a conversation with the boys in blue that didn't go too well. Yeah, when I had engaged insane mode. Yeah. And then I took a driving course with the Institute of Advanced Motoring, which I would recommend actually to sort of train me to, not be a bad boy and drive sensibly. And that did seem to make a difference. So since then, no, I haven't had any bad experiences. But I mean, I think that the obvious thing is, how much will it cost to service? What if I prang it, etc. Servicing costs on my car actually surprisingly low because it doesn't require servicing to maintain the warranty. As you will discover, there are relatively few moving parts on an electric car. It's basically got a motor that drives the wheels directly. So there's no clutch, there's no transmission tunnel, there's no
valves,
etc. etc. So essentially, I've had my car 6 years. It's been serviced twice. And the services were cheaper than my BMW services, so yeah, I don't think it's been outrageous. I did manage to prang it once when a van driver let me into a space, and I turned to thank him, and the guy who was moving stopped moving, and I ran into him. That cost me £1,000. That wasn't a happy experience, but other than that, touch wood. Yeah, nothing bad.
Can I pop in?
Well, I'm searching for one. Sorry, Ray, you had an unpleasant
I wanted to put in my bad experience, because it's fair, I think, to say that my worst experience was with the dealer that sold me the thing. Because they knew nothing about charging. Nothing. And I had to go back twice and say, look, I really must know more about how you charge this car. So don't expect, that's all I'm saying, don't expect if you go to a dealer, they will know all your answers about all your questions.
No, that is a good point. And if like me, you don't enjoy reading manuals, my top tip would be most electric cars have a Facebook group associated. So there's a Tesla owners group on Facebook, pretty much full of nerds who know everything there is to know and have read the manual backwards. So you just type, this is my question, and within 5 minutes the answer comes back. So that will work whether you have a Nissan Leaf or a...
Do they read the manual?
They do,
Oh.
yeah. So if you're responsible and like reading manuals, then away you go, yeah.
I think my wife Ali will agree that certainly with the previous car, with 100 miles range, then we had some interesting, what should we say, little experiences making sure that it did get charged up. I remember a hotel in the Cotswolds where we were assured that there was something nearby which didn't work. And we finished up, we parked as near to our upstairs bedroom window as we could, and out of the window came a cable which was plugged into the good old 13 amp socket, plugged into the car, left it overnight, fine. But a little bit of ingenuity, but again, the need for that is much less month by month. Really is becoming much less necessary to be. I mean, first adopters, which we regard ourselves as, I think, first adopters have to go adventurously forward. Okay, we've wrinkled a few things and straightened them out here and there, but it's good fun. But now, a lot of it is much smoother.
Shall we go for questions, Dick?
Yeah.
About five, just a bit more than 5 minutes
Yes,
left.
by all means.
So who's got some questions?
What about battery life?
That's a huge issue because obviously the battery is the most expensive component in the car. So my car the battery came with an 8-year warranty on it. So if there is a problem with the battery, I just take it back to Tesla and they will replace it. In practice, my car was 253 miles of range when I bought it, and here we are 6 years in, it's still got 225 on a charge, so it's about 90% of capacity after 6 years and 50-odd thousand miles of range.
What happens to the battery when it's died?
It will be turned, I think, it will be turned into a domestic battery storage for solar. So they have a life after this, that basically, when the capacity drops to, shall we say, 70% or whatever, it means that the car is losing range, that won't go quite as far. At some point, you reach the point where you think, this is kind of tedious. If the car won't do 100 miles, there's really no point. I bought this car on the basis it does 250 miles on a charge. But the battery is still, in my case, it's an 85 kilowatt hour battery, so even if it's got 50% capacity, it's still 42.5 kilowatt hours, which is bigger than the battery in a Zoe, for example. So you can use it, it can do useful things. Typically solar storage.
Could you would doing a battery change be the same as doing a whole engine change? Would you be better buying a new car?
Well, that's a great question. When I bought my car, Elon Musk, who runs Tesla, said, we're gonna, we'll have your back. Basically, you will be able to replace the battery, but obviously since then battery technology has changed, so it's not as easy to do that. I think it will be possible. I won't have to scrap the car, that would be absurd. What will happen is I will put a bigger battery in. So, and the beauty of that is you'll get more range. The other thing to say about electric cars is they get better over time, not worse. So if I put a bigger battery in, my car's 85 kilowatt hours, currently they have a 100 kilowatt hour battery. If I were to put a 120 kilowatt hour battery, not only am I going to get more range than I ever had originally, but also, amazingly, the car will go faster because the bigger the battery, the faster you can discharge it.
Just one more
Yeah.
question about that though. The
Yeah.
bigger the battery, the more weight you're carrying,
Correct.
the less power.
Not the less power, but obviously the more energy it takes to lug the car again. So in the case of my car, which has a big battery, the battery weighs 2/3 of a ton. So that's a fair old chunk to be carrying around,
Yeah.
which does make it therefore slightly less efficient than if it were lighter. But it's an electric car driven by green electrons, so in the grand scheme of things, it's not. I'm not having to burn more oil in order to shift that weight. I basically just have to make the windmill go around a couple of extra times.
Can I just say two little quick points? One is that if you have one of these cars with a battery in, they never actually let it go empty. They never make it completely full. They have something down to the top, something up to the bottom, say, oh, that's your minimum, that's your maximum. So you're charging up and down the middle range, which extends the life hugely. A taxi company in Cornwall bought a Leaf in 2013, and they used it every day for taxi work. 50,000 miles a year.
Yeah,
At
they
the
use
end
it in
of
Amsterdam.
3 years, they decided to retire it because the battery wasn't up to it. That had did 150,000 miles. So they do intrinsically have a good life, treat them easily, they'll last longer, everything's on your side.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Teslas, there are Teslas that have got 200, 300,000 miles on them on the original battery. So I think the thing about my car is the motor's rated for 500,000 miles. The battery is a bit of an unknown, but they give an 8-year warranty as a manufacturer's warranty. But as I say, there are cars that have done hundreds of thousands of miles on the original battery. So the economics of that are better than for internal combustion engine cars. Sorry. Question.
If you're charging sort of on the motorway or
Yeah.
not at home, is there any guarantee that the electricity you're putting in your car is
No,
renewable?
there isn't. But obviously, as we move as a country to more renewables, we have days when no coal is being burnt anywhere. Then whatever you're using, whatever tariff you're on, your electrons are green. I mean, I pay to have a green tariff. Do I know that the actual electrons entering my battery came from a? I don't. You know, they're in the mix. But I'm just making sure that my company bought them as green electrons from a green producer.
One more, in the blue, boy in the blue, back.
Would the battery size affect the charging time?
Yes. So basically, obviously the bigger the battery, the more electricity you need to fill it. But the flip side of that is the bigger the battery, the faster it can be charged and discharged. So it's sort of two sides of the coin. But essentially, you will need more electricity to go into a bigger battery.
1 more minute, 1 more question. Yes.
I think it's a bit of an elephant in the room in terms of money, because I'd like to buy an electric car, but
Yeah.
I had bought a 10 grand car, petrol last year.
Yeah.
I looked into electric, second hand, and you're looking at 15 to 20 for
Yeah.
a reasonably sized, non-small car. All these things you talked about are great, but the bottom line is
Yeah.
you're not well off. I don't think you can buy them.
Dick.
Could I just say, have a look at the two cars. They're both second-hand. They were both relatively cheaply bought. For a new price of about 28 or something thousand, we got ours for 16,000 after just 3 years.
Okay.
So buy from a reputable dealer, you'll have huge reductions.
Is that a small
And do you
car?
think
Yeah.
that's going to
Yeah.
happen more?
Yes.
The more electric cars, the
it's-
more
Yeah,
second-hand
it-
ones.
yeah.
And
It's supply and demand, so
Yeah.
the price will come down. The good news is the price of the new ones is coming down, and therefore obviously
Yeah.
the price of the old ones is coming. But it's going to take some
A
time.
few years
Yeah.
time.
But that's happening quicker, because when I bought my car, I think I was number 40 on the Tesla waiting list, and I bought the 98,000th Tesla in the whole wide world. Well, Tesla's now produced over 1 million cars, so that they're not the biggest producer of cars. So as more electric cars flood the market, prices will come down.
Yeah, I can see that.
so listen everyone, we're going to wrap up now. I'm going to ask you to go out that way and carry on any questions.